To make the most of this jQuery course, there's a few things you need to know. First, there's the fundamentals of the web. So in this case, we have a web browsing application. It's Internet Explorer, but it could be Chrome, Safari, Firefox, or Opera. Now that application requests a specific web address. And that request is routed onto the internet, where lots of mysterious and magical things happen. But ultimately, it's received by a web server. Now this is simply a powerful PC running specific software. In this case, the server needs to generate an HTML page. Now it might do that by returning a static file, or it might run a script in, say, PHP, Ruby, or ASP.NET to generate that HTML. But ultimately, it's returned back via the internet to the web browser. Now the browser understands that HTML, and it recognizes commands to fetch images, style sheets, JavaScript code, Flash games, or any other resources. And it makes similar requests for those files. And once it has all the components, it can display a completed web page. Now in these videos, we're mainly concerned with the browser rendering. That's this side of the diagram. It's commonly known as client-side code. It will help if you have a basic understanding of HTML. In these videos, we're going to be using HTML5, but it really doesn't matter whether you prefer HTML4 or XHTML1. HTML defines your content. Your content, which is here, is surrounded by HTML tags, here and here. And these tags indicate what the content actually is. In this case, it's a paragraph. And HTML has many tags for headings, bullet lists, images, sections, and lots of other different elements. It'll help if you know which tags are available, but it's not absolutely essential. Any tag can be assigned an ID. Now an ID is a unique name within the page. It can only be used once. So in this particular case, we have a div element with the ID of widget. We can only have one widget in the page, in the same way as you might only have one header or one footer. Now classes are similar to IDs, except they can apply to any number of elements. So for example, we might want to display error messages, and there could be more than one. So in this case, we apply a class of error whenever we need one. Now in this case, we've applied it to 2 paragraph tags, but it could be to any element. It'll also help if you have a basic understanding of cascading style sheets, or CSS. Now CSS is used to control the layout of your content. It determines how the browser positions and styles your HTML tags and elements. CSS rules start with a selector, as you can see here. And it's really important to understand selectors. In this first case, it's just simply a paragraph tag. It's saying wherever a paragraph tag is encountered, apply these rules. And in this case, we want to align the text to the left and make it black. The following CSS rule selects any element with an ID of widget. Now remember, we can only have one element on the page with that ID. And in this case, it's going to add a blue border with a width of 1 pixel. Finally, we have a selector which finds all elements with a class of error. Now in this case, we've actually been a bit more specific and said we only want it to apply to paragraph tags with a class of error. So in this case, we're going to set the color of that text to red, which overrides the paragraph color of black set up here. It'll help if you can program in JavaScript already, but you can get by with a few basic skills. Now JavaScript controls the functionality. That's the interactive actions within your page. So for example, you might want to check that a user has entered their email address before they submit their login form. Or perhaps your widget wants to expand and contract when it's clicked. Or we could even make an AJAX request back to the web server and update parts of the page in real time, but more about that later. All the interactivity is controlled by JavaScript, or it's sometimes less commonly known as ECMAScript. Now essentially, JavaScript is a programming language. It's the most used programming language on the planet since it appears in the majority of web pages. But it's also one of the most widely misunderstood. The first cause of confusion is the name. Java and JavaScript are not related in any way whatsoever. There are a number of superficial syntactical similarities, but that's about as far as it goes. The script part of the name also gives the impression that JavaScript is not a real language, it's somehow cut down or like a macro or less capable than Java. It's not. If anything, some of the more popular features in JavaScript are making their ways into other languages. JavaScript is not just found in web browsers. It's used on the server in Node.js. You'll also find it in Flash. ActionScript is very, very similar to JavaScript. PDF files can have JavaScript embedded. Widgets that appear on the Microsoft and Apple desktops use JavaScript. OpenOffice can use it, and WebOS applications are written in JavaScript. Now, in some ways, JavaScript isn't like other languages. It's prototypal rather than class-based, which you don't really need to understand, but it can confuse developers who come from other languages. However, once you get your head around the concept, it's a really powerful language and you can write code in many different ways. And finally, JavaScript has a reputation for being inconsistent and buggy. That's not true. JavaScript itself is very consistent. However, it's not necessarily the case for browsers. They all have differences in quirks which can cause development headaches. Now, that's not a fault with the language itself, but the objects that you manipulate with JavaScript. And that's where jQuery really helps us.